Sierra Leone, or Salone, is a country with a rich, intriguing and sometimes tragic history. Although the name Sierra Leone may invoke memories of its recent struggles such as the civil war at the end of the 20th century and the recent Ebola epidemic, there are other important episodes in this country's history that have shaped the way it is today. Like many other African nations, slavery and colonisation unfortunately play a key role in Sierra Leonean history. However, strives for freedom and the development of a diverse society are also integral to the story of Sierra Leone's past. So, without further ado, here is a brief history of Sierra Leone. Sierra Leone is a country in West Africa, with Guinea bordering to the north and Liberia to the south. Little is known of early Sierra Leonean history due to limited archaeological data. However, what is clear is that the area of land we now call Sierra Leone has been inhabited for perhaps 3,000 years or more. For years, this land remained relatively sheltered from the outside world. In this time, a number of tribal cultures had developed, such as the Shebro, Limba, Loko and Temne, all of whom remain living in Sierra Leone today. Nevertheless, such isolation from the outside world would begin to change. In the 1400s, the Portuguese were prominent global explorers and had made various interactions with people up and down the West African coast. Indeed, the origins of the name Sierra Leone can be traced back to the Portuguese, as it supposedly hails from 1462, when Portuguese sailor Pedro da Sintra was exploring the western peninsula of Sierra Leone. Upon seeing the area, he named it Sierra-Leone, which can be translated to Lion Mountains in English. Although the reasoning for the naming is debated, it is theorised that the thunderstorms that occurred on the Sierra Leonean coast sounded like the roar of a lion to the Portuguese sailors. An alternative theory is that the land formations of the mountainous western area resembled a lion. Sierra-Leone provides the origins for the name Sierra Leone, which is an evolution from the original label. Outside influence also came in the shape of the Mane invasions in the mid-1500s. The Mane people hailed from the Malian Empire and were led by Queen Masariko. Due to their military organisation and superior weaponry, they were able to conquer large swathes of modern-day Sierra Leone by 1555, notably the coastal regions. Nevertheless, these invasions are hugely culturally significant to the makeup of modern-day Sierra Leone. For example, the Mende people, who account for roughly 30% of Sierra Leone's population, have been greatly linguistically and culturally influenced by the Mane. Gradually, over time, the Mane assimilated into the population of the existing tribal structure in the region. Throughout this period, Islam also began to gain more influence in the area, with Muslim missionaries, traders and teachers from the East peacefully spreading the religion. Due to this, Islam remains the largest religion in Sierra Leone today, accounting for about 78% of the population. Despite the earliest European interactions in the area coming from the Portuguese, the Western power that has had by far the greatest impact on Sierra Leonean history is Britain. Although the British traded with the indigenous peoples for other goods, Britain's main interest was the trading of slaves. The capturing of slaves in Sierra Leone can be traced back to the Elizabethan era and further, where notable English privateers such as John Hawkins and Francis Drake captured slaves from Sierra Leone. Between the 1500s and 1800, the taking of slaves flourished, with the British and other European powers acquiring people through either capture or trade with local tribes. Despite being tough to quantify, it is estimated that over 12 million slaves were taken from West Africa to the Americas, and as Sierra Leone was one of the main areas in which European powers sought slaves from, it is safe to assume that a significant proportion of those slaves came from Sierra Leone. Remnants of the heavy impact that the slave trade had on Sierra Leone can still be seen today in the form of the fort at Bunce Island built in the 1670s. For example, it is estimated that 50,000 slaves were transported out of Bunce Island Fort alone. Slavery as an institution would have a profound effect on West Africa and Sierra Leone especially. Many in the region suffered and died as a result of the slave trade. However, the western area of Sierra Leone would soon become a place in which freed slaves from various places in the Americas and Britain would return. With increasing abolitionist sentiment in England, the attention of prominent abolitionists such as Granville Sharp turned to the resettling of former slaves in Africa. In 1787, the first attempt to establish a colony for freed slaves in the western area came in the form of the establishment of Granville Town, named after Sharp. However, this first resettlement failed due to poor conditions and hostility from local sub-chiefs, amongst other factors. A successful colony would later be set up in 1791 by the British-formed Sierra Leone Company. The occupants of this colony were some people left over from the failed Granville Town settlement and freed slaves from Nova Scotia, many of whom had fought in order to earn their freedom in the American War of Independence. Over 1,000 freed slaves travelled from Nova Scotia and named their new settlement Freetown, the modern-day capital, to emblemise their freedom and new life. The settlement did encounter troubles in its earlier years, in the form of internal divisions between the Sierra Leone Company and the settlers. However, the numbers in the colony were bolstered by the Maroons in 1800, who had fought for their freedom from slavery in Jamaica. The culture of the Maroons can still be seen in Sierra Leone to this day in the form of St. John's Maroon Church in Freetown. In 1808, the British state took full control of the western area, establishing the British Crown Colony of Sierra Leone. After the abolition of the slave trade in the British Empire in 1807, the population of Freetown was gradually added to through the repatriation of people taken from captured slave ships. This contributed to the population of the colony increasing to 40,000 in 1840. The freed slave inhabitants of the western area would go on to be called Creoles, whose culture is reflected by both their African ancestry and their experiences with slavery. The relative early success of Freetown Colony led to the establishment of institutions such as Fora Bay College in 1827, the oldest university in West Africa. Despite British control of the western area during this period, their influence over the rest of the region that covers modern-day Sierra Leone remained relatively limited at the beginning of the 19th century. However, this would gradually begin to change, with the British exerting further influence into the rest of the area through force and treating with local tribes. It is worth noting that although the slave trade in the British Empire was abolished, illegal slave trading off the Sierra Leonean coast continued long after 1807. Perhaps one of the most notable stories stemming from this continued slavery is that of the revolt on La Amistad, one of the most prominent slave revolts in global history. In 1839, Mende, who were captured from Sierra Leone, revolted against their Spanish captors on board La Amistad and took control of the ship. After their successful revolt, the Sierra Leoneans chose to leave a few of the Spanish shipmasters alive with the intention to navigate back to Africa. However, they were tricked by the Spanish, who directed them towards the United States, where they eventually landed in Long Island, New York. The Mende captives were subsequently jailed in New Haven, Connecticut, and a diplomatic and legal battle ensued surrounding the situation to the Sierra Leoneans, focusing on whether they were free men and women or property of the Spanish. After taking their case to the United States Supreme Court, the Mende won their freedom and were able to return to their lives in Africa. Sengbe Pie was the instigator of the rebellion aboard the ship, which made Pie the leader of the only successful slave ship revolt where the captives returned to Africa in American history. For this reason, Sengbe Pie is one of the most revered figures in freed slave history and a symbol of global freedom to this day.